Hey folks, this is Simon from Card Gaming, and today I'm going to talk about the March ban list, which for me, a couple hours ago at least, just dropped. And I want to talk about its effect on the meta and what I think are going to be the top decks moving forward. Again, pretty much all of these videos are going to be completely opinion based, and they're all going to be speculation, including mine. So feel free to leave your own opinions in the comments, or if you have anything you disagree with, feel free to discuss that as well. But yeah, I mean, this ban list has been a long time coming. People were getting a little tired of the last format because Virtual World was just making VFD pretty much every game, and it was very not fun to play with because as soon as that effect resolves, there's nothing you can do about it for the rest of the turn. It's just very, very frustrating to deal with, and I'm pretty glad it's gone. In a similar vein, Zexal was also banned. Pretty glad that card is gone. This is probably a preemptive hit because of the new support in the next main set, but it also kind of impacted the Numeron decks that we're seeing a bit of play toward the end of the last format. So yeah, those are two pretty solid hits, and then the last ban was Union Carrier, which is a pretty substantial hit toward Drytron. I guess Konami decided that Dawn Knight was the last straw, so they just couldn't tolerate Carrier being run anymore, and they got rid of it. So rip to Drytron and to all ABC players. Drytron also lost 2 copies of Cyber Angel Ben 10, so those are pretty big hits. And as for Unlimits, I'm not really going to talk about many of these because I think most of them are not that impactful, although I'll probably touch on Dragon Buster Destruction Sword probably at the end of the video. But yeah, before I talk about the my top 5 at least, I want to briefly discuss the future of Drytron because I've spent a lot of time making Drytron content for this channel, and I think current decks, or the deck before the list at least, was very, very fairy focused, and so losing 2 copies of Ben 10 is really huge. You don't really have access to your fairy combos nearly as consistently. You have a fewer number of fairies in the deck now to make those combos live. Your follow-up is worse because, before you had like Cyber Petite to get your other Ben 10, but now you only have the one Ben 10. You're more vulnerable to stuff like DD Crow, Hawkero, etc. You can't really play Natasha anymore. Just so many little things that just add up. And you can maybe play like the Megalith version, so I threw this together in like 5 minutes as an example of a potential Megalith list, since, Fool can recycle Ben 10, which might be cool. You can make cards like Beatrice for consistency, which is cool. But overall, I think you're still going to struggle. And I think if Ben 10 to 1 was the only hit for Drytron, then this deck would maybe still be like roguish or maybe low-tiered. But losing Carrier in addition to 2 copies of Ben 10 is, I think, huge, and I don't really think you're going to see much of this deck until maybe Lightning Overdrive when we get the rank 1, which is pretty good. But that's basically a new format, so not really any point thinking about that now. And even last format, toward the end of last format, the only new toy that Drytron really got was Pot of Prosperity, which some people were playing around with, but last format you saw people start to drop this deck and to move forward into decks like Virtual World and to Dragon Link, which were just better combo decks without as many glaring weaknesses that you could exploit as easily as with Drytron. So yeah, I would expect this deck to take more of a backseat until maybe another format, which is a little tragic, but that's how the meta goes. As for other decks, the top 5, or my top 5 at least, is very subjective, especially the 4th and the 5th slots could be pretty much any of the decks on here are qualified enough to be there, especially these first 3. Tri-Brigades are pretty solid. They have quite a few remote duel successes. Overall, I'm not super convinced on their overall strength. I think they need a little bit more to really cement their place in the meta. But they're a fun deck. They're getting new cards, new support. The new Link 2, Bear Bloom, I think it's called, in Lightning Overdrive is really cool, and it kind of changes how the deck is played, so that is something to look forward to. Shaddolls are pretty good. There's some Pure and some Dogma Shaddol variants, some Trap Heavy, some not Trap Heavy, and all of those we're seeing differing levels of success last format. Winda is really strong against decks like Virtual World still, and Board Breakers in addition I think got a lot better, so I think Shaddol can make use of cards like Board Breakers, so like Dark Ruler, Super Poly in particular, I think are cards that you could expect to see played in Shaddol, and so I think this deck is in a good spot going forward. And then Zoo is another kind of weird one. It's more of like an anti-meta deck, but because VFD is now gone, you can more easily just spam Borbo into Zeus and then just win games off of that alone. Zeus is one of the best cards in the game right now, and so Zoo is just in a solid spot. Even again in the pre-Banlist format, you had decks like Zodiac Striker was a weird deck that has been popping around on ladder. So shout out to Herman for that. That is a really funny deck. And yeah, we'll just wait and see where this goes. And then the rest are just kind of older decks that have been around for a long time. So Dogmatic Unvoked, Prank Kids, backer decks like Subterror, Altergeist, even Paleo Frog saw a bit of success. Phantom Knight is solid. They got 3 Bardish now. I don't think it does that much, but these are just a solid combo deck. Similarly, Adamascipator are also just a solid combo deck with some decent event showings. And all of these are really solid picks. I think you should expect to see pretty much all of these pop up at some place or another in the coming format. But yeah, without further ado, why don't we just jump into my actual top 5. So number 5 might be a bit surprising, but it's actually, for me, Burning Abyss. This is, I think, a really cool deck, and it was actually catching quite a bit of steam toward the end of last format. I think part of the reason that's become popular again recently is because of Pot of Prosperity. This deck just does a really good job making use of this card. And you have a ton of really solid normal summon openers that go into a Beatrice plus Dragoon play. And so pretty much all of these variants are going to be Dragoon variants. And this deck just uses it really well because Scarm is generating so much discard fodder for you. Your Dragoon is always live, and then when you pitch your Graph that you search off your Scarm, you pitch your Graph for a Dragoon, and then your Graph gives you another Scarm, and that gives you Tour Guide for turn 3, and you just always kill them. So this is a really cool deck. This is partially based on Josh Ooster's list, which is just on YouTube. He doesn't play Rhino Warrior, but I added it a bit for my personal preferences. There's a couple ways to build it also. There was another variant from the 3v3 LCS that played Desires instead of Prosperity, and it played a ton of hand traps and no actual trap cards. So it was like 35 monsters or something. And so there's a couple of different ways to build this deck. I just think it's a really cool deck. It's very, very floaty. You can play a lot of power traps. And this deck was seeing some steam even last format with Calamities and full power Drytron and other decks like that running around. So this is really kind of probably an unexpected pick, but this is one of my favorite decks going into the new format. We'll see how it performs. Also, it makes use of Zeus. I think Zeus is probably the best extra deck card in the game right now, and so decks that can make use of Zeus really effectively are also going to be very strong. So this deck definitely has been making more and more use of Zeus, and it's just a great thing for a deck to have. And also, the deck is insanely floaty even with Zeus, so when you detach your BAs on your opponent's turn, then you're getting more and more value out of them. So yeah, I think it's in a good spot. Yeah, that's it for number 5. Moving on to number 4 is actually going to be Dinosaur. So if you played several formats ago when the meta was largely Adamascipator and decks like Infernoble and Dragon Link, particularly the very Dragon Link heavy focused format with Link Cross running around, then you may be familiar with how Dinosaur works already. It's a deck that really thrives on kind of preying on combo decks, as it's one of the only decks able to actually break through combo boards. And that's largely because of these really powerful cards like Dark Ruler No More and Mystic Mine, and also Miscellaneousaurus kind of protecting your dinosaurs from their interactions. So in the last format, Dinosaur really struggled, largely because of decks like Virtual World, where after you resolved Calamities, there was nothing you could do as Dinosaur that would break the board because you couldn't do anything. So there was no way for Dinosaur to effectively and consistently interact with a Virtual World board. And so this deck really struggled. And another reason this deck struggled is because Mystic Mine is a really powerful card in this deck, and it allows you to play really ignorantly into a full established combo board. But Virtual World has cards like Chuche, and in general, Mystic Mine was not a very good card last format, and so Dinosaur really lost out on a lot of its ways to interact with the top meta, and so you didn't see as much of it in the metagame. And so now that Calamities has been addressed, and you might see a return to the top combo decks potentially, they're going to be boards that don't have cards like Calamities. They're going to be boards that you can interact with Mystic Mine and Dark Ruler and force out negates, or nullify their negates pretty much, and then you can establish your own cards, or you can just deck them out with mine. And yeah, I think you should expect to see a resurgence in Dinosaur. I don't necessarily know if it'll be as good as it was the format that it won the 3v3 LCS. But it's pretty strong. Nothing got hit. They still have Misket 3. They got Pot of Prosperity to play with, which is a really solid card in this deck because you can just dig for the appropriate breaking card. And pretty much any deck that could have played Extravagance in the past can play Prosperity now. And so Dino is no exception. I expect it to see more play in this format, and we'll just see how it ends up doing. Coming in at number 3 is Outlich, and this is going to be kind of a catch-all for every Outlich variant that is played. This particular list is Jesse Cotton's list from LCS 10, but you obviously shouldn't take this as representative for what Outlich is going to look like going forward, since this was very highly tailored to the event, tailored to beat decks like Drytron and Virtual World, and so this is just kind of discussing the pure variant like this that plays stun cards like Inspector Border and Rivalry, but also, the Zodiac Eldritch variant that won LCS 10, the Dragoon Heavy variant that plays, the full Rena's Insight package and whatnot, the Dogma Heavy versions, etc. So pretty much all of those are under one blanket here, because, cards like Outland and Sanguine, these cards weren't hit at all on the list, even though some people expected them that they might be. And so this deck is more or less untouched. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to continue to do as well, because it's going to depend on how well Outlich matches into the top decks right now. And while we're not really sure what that's going to be, if decks like Dragon Link and Dinosaur, for example, start to be really popular, and you might see this deck struggle to adapt to beat kind of all of them. And that could contribute to this deck perhaps not doing as well as in the previous format, even though it didn't actually receive any direct hits in the ban list. So really, time will tell. This is still going to be a solid choice. It's going to be a very popular choice. A lot of people have their Outlich cards, and if you play a lot of remote duels, you should not expect this deck to go away anytime soon. So Outlich coming in at number 3. The number 2 deck in my ranking is Virtual World, and this is a really weird deck to try to place in this list, because if you have been online at all in the hours following the ban list, you have probably seen people arguing about this deck, and you have probably noticed that there are 2 popular camps of people. So the first group thinks that this deck is completely dead without VFD, and that VFD hard carried this deck throughout multiple formats. And so with it gone, this deck has too many glaring flaws to be the best deck or to even remain competitive, and they expect it to fall off the competitive metagame. And then the other camp is the total opposite, where they think that this deck is going to continue to be the best deck even without VFD, because its engine is just too strong. And it has too much recursion and or versatility and or sheer combo potential to be irrelevant, I guess. So only time is really going to tell who's in the right here. Overall, it is true that the engine of this deck was untouched. It can do the same combos. It just can't end on VFD anymore. And the problem is that there is no rank 9 in the game that is anywhere near as impactful as Calamity's was. So before, this deck was very, very good at making use of Cloud Castle repeatedly to usually end on like a double VFD, with almost every 2-card combo could end on like a double VFD if you knew what you were doing. But now, like, the rank 9s aren't nearly as much value, and you're kind of spending a lot of resources to not really accomplish that much. And so there's, for example, the Plant XCs in Blazing Vortex. Hyperion is not really anywhere near as comparable as VFD. It's got a lot of just things it's missing. It can't negate on your own turn, so now you have vulnerabilities to cards like Nibiru that are difficult to get around. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what people come up with as they try to find a new win condition for this deck, as I brought up earlier. I think there are going to be 3 possible directions that players go for this deck. So the first is going to be more of a hand loop strategy, which is what I've kind of shown you here. And I'm going to let a replay of this kind of play in the background while I talk over it. It's pretty simple. You just, instead of like establishing boss monsters or, making some wombo combo board, you just try to rip as many cards as possible out of their hand and then win the game. Usually with like a Lulu added back in the end phase. And this is a strategy that has actually been around for a while, since like the deck came out more or less. And it's seen, even while VFD was legal, this saw a couple of hops here and there. You just use Gotems to rip cards out of their hand, and then eventually you make a Phantom Fortress or Blathnir and you rip more cards out of their hand. And it's pretty strong, but it's also pretty fragile. A lot of the hands require pretty specific opening hands or pretty high numbers of Virtual World names to properly combo. And you have difficulty doing much through interruptions. So sometimes, if you get like a hand trap hit on a crucial part of your combo, you end up only hand looping like 1 card, and then you don't have any kind of interaction on their turn. You also kind of struggle to put up any protections, so rarely do you ever manage to put like a Gossip Shadow up early on and then do your hand loop under the Gossip Shadow to protect against cards like Nibiru, so that's a problem. And then also, the other issue is you might go up against a deck like Eldritch or Shaddoll or Burning Abyss, and your hand looping with Gothams, which sends up to the graveyard, doesn't actually end up doing anything. And after you do your hand loop, you don't end on any boss monsters, and you end up just losing the game after your full combo, which is not something that should ever happen. So yeah, this is a possibility. I think people will try this out for sure because it seems very powerful, but I think it has a lot of drawbacks as well. Another option is more of like the wombo combo route that I discussed with cards like Ultimate Tzolk'in. This deck has always been able to make this card pretty easily because it has a lot of level 6 tuners like Lao Lao and Coral Dragon. So the idea is you just make Tzolk'in, you set a spell trap to trigger it, you summon Crystal Wing. This is your Nibiru protection. And then optionally you could stop there, you can make like Shen Shen, and then there are even janky variants that go into cards like Red Dark Dragoon by hard fusing for this with Muddy Mud Dragon and Tzolk'in, which is a dragon. So that's a potential option. You end on something like Crystal Wing on your 5th summon, plus Dragoon, plus Chuche, plus like a Shen Shen off of your best hands, which is pretty oppressive. And likewise, this is a very high commitment route, right? So this is something that you're not guaranteed to have through disruption necessarily. This might be something that maybe isn't as resilient, or maybe you can still get this broken by like board breakers, and so this has its own set of drawbacks as well. And then the third way I see this deck going, and I hate to use this term, but it could be more of like a mid-range style, which is a word that people have kind of said so much that it doesn't really mean anything anymore. But basically, I could see this deck potentially going more of like a more modest combo route that is maybe a little more consistent. So you aim for like Shen Shen plus Chuche, plus maybe other cards, and then you focus on not like making a board that wins the game outright, but establishing resources or disruptions that will let you survive to turn 3. So one example is making a card like Ptolemy M7 on your turn 1 to potentially add back a hand trap or a combo piece that you discarded off of like Qinglong, for example, and using that as your disruption. So like adding back an Ash to you discarded. Another example is when this deck makes like Chaofeng, and then you pop it, and then you search a tuner hand trap, and then the hand trap becomes disruption on your opponent's turn. And you can fine tune the hand trap that you search to be the most impactful one in the matchup. So stuff like that I think has a lot of potential. It's like a slower, kind of more modest way to play this deck. But it may not be enough depending on what else is meta. So if, like, for example, the meta is very, very back row focused, maybe you don't have enough that you can actually search in that, and you end up struggling. So yeah, I think I expect this deck to be the most popular deck still, just because like all of the groundwork is still the same. You just have to kind of change where you end up. So it wouldn't surprise me to see this be the most played deck at the upcoming LCS. It wouldn't surprise me to see it be the most represented deck in the top cut, but I have this gut feeling that this deck isn't going to win the next LCS, and we'll just kind of see if I'm proved right or not. But yeah, that leaves one more deck in my ranking. If you haven't already figured it out by this point, my number 1 pick for the upcoming format is Dragon Link. This deck is really, really good, and it was totally unhit by the Banlist. It was actually so unhit that it got better because they gave us back Dragon Buster Destruction Sword for some reason, which could end up being a huge mistake on Konami's part, but we're just going to have to wait and see on that one. This deck is very strong. This is Gabriel Ness's list from LCS 10, card for card. It is a bit outdated because this deck got a ton of popularity toward the end of the format, and people started making adaptations like adding cards like Quackimero Drago to the side deck, largely to deal with the mirror, because this deck was just getting that popular. Popular to the point where people considered this deck to be the second best, if not the best deck of the previous format, competing with Virtual World. So now the Virtual World is kind of lost VFD, whereas this deck got completely untouched and is getting new toys in the future. That put this deck as number 1 for me, above Virtual World. So yeah. Regarding the Buster Lock, you may have noticed some of your fellow Dragon Link players on Discord talk about cards like DMZ Dragon and Dragoon in the Arm 11, which are able to establish the Buster Lock by themselves without Union Carrier. So those could be options you see in this deck going forward. I'm not really sure if they're going to end up being standard, but they're more options for a deck that already has a ton of options. So it's going to make this deck hard to deal with online or in remote duels, of course. And then looking forward to Ghost from the Past in April, we're getting new Dragoonity support in the form of cards like Ramus. And Ramus is absolutely absurd. It completely changes the face of the deck. And you're going to see a massive shift in the way that Dragon Link is built. And there's no other comparable support for other decks coming at that time frame. And so since we're stuck with this ban list for quite a while, I think you can expect to see Dragon Link kind of comfortably assert itself as definitely one of the best decks, likely the best deck in the future toward the middle or toward the end of this format. So yeah, those are my predictions. That is my placing of the top 5. Let me know what you thought about this. Let me know if, or I guess let me know what you want to see in terms of videos going forward. And yeah, all right, happy Banlist Day. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. Check out our sponsors. Peace.